Florida was supposed to be the safe bet. No state income tax, warm winters, waterfront living for a fraction of what it costs in California or New York. For about 2 years, between 2020 and 2022, that story was completely true. People moved south by the hundreds of thousands. Home prices doubled in some zip codes. Builders couldn't pour concrete fast enough. And then the assumptions that made all of that work started breaking, one by one. Insurance companies stopped writing policies in entire counties. A federal law forced condo buildings to fund decades of deferred maintenance. Overnight, Hurricane Ian rewrote the risk map for the entire southwest coast, and the bills from that storm are still arriving. Right now, in June 2026, the average Florida home has lost 3.7% of its value over the past year, and that's the statewide average, which smooths over some genuinely alarming local numbers. If you own property in Florida, or you're planning to retire there, the statewide average is not your number. Your number is the specific town you're in, or the one you're considering. And in 10 towns across this state, that number looks a lot worse than the headline. This video covers all 10. Here are 10 overpriced Florida towns every smart retiree is leaving right now, June 2026. Lakeland. Start here because Lakeland is the most straightforward case on this list, and that actually makes it useful. No hurricane damage, no six-figure assessment bills, no insurance carrier exodus. Just a market that expanded past its natural demand ceiling and is now quietly paying for it. During the boom, Lakeland worked because of geography. It sits directly on the Interstate 4 corridor between Tampa and Orlando. When coastal prices exploded, buyers who got priced out of those metros looked inland, and Lakeland was right there. Affordable, accessible, low density, surrounded by freshwater lakes. Prices climbed roughly 40% between 2020 and 2022. The problem is that Lakeland never restricted supply. Developers built into that demand wave aggressively. And when high interest rates killed the overflow demand from Tampa and Orlando, when the buyers who would have moved there simply stopped qualifying for mortgages, Lakeland was left with too much housing and not enough buyers. Today, the median home sits at around $304,000, flat, zero growth year over year. Active inventory is up around 18%, and properties are sitting on the market past 70 days on average. About 1 in 5 active listings has already taken a price cut. There's no dramatic villain here. It's a slow correction in a market that got ahead of itself. For a retiree on a fixed income, the risk is simple. If you buy here expecting appreciation, you're likely to be waiting a long time. But if you're purely looking for a low-drama inland lifestyle within an hour of 2 major metros, Lakeland isn't broken, it's just cooling. Jacksonville. Jacksonville makes this list for a different reason than every other city here, and that distinction matters. There's no insurance crisis driving this one, no structural assessment law hammering condo owners. The problem in Jacksonville is a builder war, and individual homeowners are losing it. During the pandemic construction surge, developers flooded Jacksonville, and especially adjacent St. Johns County with new inventory. The infrastructure is genuinely good. Master-planned communities, modern amenities, reputable schools, a diversified economy anchored by a deepwater port, and a significant military presence. The region also sits far enough north to carry meaningfully less hurricane exposure than Tampa or Miami. On fundamentals alone, Jacksonville made sense. But the builders who read that source story correctly during the boom kept building past the point where demand could absorb the supply. When the buyer pool contracted as rates rose, developers needed to move product. So they started cutting prices, and not by small amounts. Volume builders in St. Johns County right now are undercutting resale listings by $20,000 to $30,000 per home. And they're stacking incentives on top, rate buydowns, closing credits, free appliances. A retiree who bought at the peak in 2022 and needs to sell cannot compete with that. They don't have a builder's margin. They can't buy down someone's mortgage rate. All they can do is keep cutting their asking price and wait. That spiral is showing up clearly in the data. Active inventory is up 22%, the steepest climb documented anywhere in Florida right now. The median price sits at roughly $308,000, essentially flat. Properties are averaging over 65 days on market, with many individual sellers going through multiple price reductions over several months without securing a transaction. For a retiree who owns a home in Jacksonville and needs to sell to fund a move or unlock equity, this market is actively working against them. For a patient buyer who can leverage builder concessions, Jacksonville's underlying strengths still hold. The risk is asymmetric right now, difficult for sellers, more reasonable for buyers who aren't in a hurry. Lehigh Acres. If Jacksonville is the builder war, Lehigh Acres is the foreclosure signal. And foreclosure data is usually the clearest leading indicator a housing market can produce, because it means a meaningful number of homeowners are already past the point of deciding to sell. The bank is making that decision for them. Lee County, which contains Lehigh Acres, recorded over 4,000 foreclosure filings in the most recent reporting period. That's the highest volume documented in roughly a decade. Lehigh Acres built its reputation as the low-cost alternative to coastal Fort Myers. Bigger lots, modest single-family homes, room to breathe without Gulf Coast prices. During the pandemic boom, new construction added fresh housing stock and attracted working-class buyers and inland-focused retirees who wanted space. That pitch worked when lending was easy and demand was flowing south from higher-cost metros. Then Hurricane Ian hit Lee County directly. The local insurance market tightened sharply and quickly, which reduced the pool of buyers who could afford the new carrying costs. Without that sustained demand, prices began softening. As values fell, homeowners who bought at peak prices, many of them on stretched budgets to begin with, found themselves in negative equity. The foreclosure filings followed. Today, the median sits near 350,000, down about 4%. Active inventory is up 28%. Roughly 1 in 5 listings carries an active price cut. Unlike adjacent coastal municipalities, Lehigh Acres doesn't have direct Gulf of Mexico access or a strong national brand identity to draw buyers back in when conditions improve. The only lever available is price, and with foreclosures continuously adding distressed inventory to the market, that floor keeps moving. For a retiree sensitive to neighborhood stability, the foreclosure rate is the number that should carry the most weight here. A 10-year high in filings doesn't resolve quickly, and the properties moving through that process apply downward pressure on every other home on the street. Bradenton. Bradenton has spent decades trading on one idea: same Gulf Coast access as Sarasota, lower price tag. That positioning made it genuinely attractive to retirees who wanted a quieter golf-centric lifestyle without paying Sarasota's premium. The beaches are accessible, the pace is slower, and historically the cost of entry was reasonable. The problem is that Bradenton's affordability reputation is now masking a significant structural liability in its older condo stock, and that liability is landing on owners with no warning and no easy exit. In 2021, Florida passed Senate Bill 4D in direct response to the Surfside condominium collapse in Miami-Dade. The law requires every condominium building over 30 years old to complete structural integrity reserve studies and fully fund maintenance reserves going forward. For newer buildings with well-managed HOAs, the adjustment was manageable. For older Bradenton buildings, where associations had spent decades deferring maintenance to keep monthly fees artificially low, the law triggered an immediate and unavoidable reckoning. The assessments being issued now are not marginal. Documented cases in Bradenton include individual owners receiving bills of $42,000 and $48,000 for roof replacements and concrete restoration work in a single building cycle. These aren't spread over years of monthly payments. They're lump sum obligations, often due with months of the notice arriving. The mechanism that makes this particularly damaging to the resale market is the simultaneous listing effect. When a large assessment hits a building, multiple owners list their units at the same time, all trying to transfer the liability to a buyer before the bill comes due. Supply floods a single building's available inventory overnight. Buyers, who can see the assessment obligation attached to every listing, walk. The result is a condo submarket with highly motivated sellers, and almost no buyer interest at any price that makes sense for the seller. Manatee County's condo inventory has climbed past 15 months of supply, more than double the threshold that defines a balanced market. About 23% of active listings carry price cuts. For a retiree on a fixed income, considering an older Bradenton condo, the listed purchase price is not the real number. The real number includes whatever assessment is already in the pipeline, and in many buildings, that pipeline is full. Northport. 4 years ago, Northport was the fastest growing city in America by population. In 2022, that title meant something real. Out-of-state cashed buyers arriving consistently, new subdivisions filling faster than they could be completed. A genuine momentum story built on quiet, modern neighborhoods at prices well below the Gulf Coast average. Hurricane Ian ended that story in September 2022. The storm's direct impact on Charlotte County triggered what the insurance industry calls a permanent hardening of the regional market. Premiums for older single-family homes in several Northport zip codes have tripled. And because most buyers need a mortgage, and mortgage lenders require insurance as a condition of the loan, and insurance has become either unaffordable or structurally unavailable in parts of the market, the transaction pipeline effectively froze. The market data reflects what happens when a growth city loses its buyer pool with no alternative source of demand to replace it. Active inventory has more than doubled over the past 2 years. Days on market now exceed 90. The median price has dropped 8% from its peak to around $410,000. Drive through certain subdivisions today and the visual tells the story before any data does. Multiple for sale signs on a single block, sometimes alongside physical remnants of storm damage that never got fully addressed. Hurricane shutter scars still visible on exterior trim years after the storm. The distinction worth making here is between a cyclical problem and a structural one. A cyclical problem, high rates, cautious buyers, slow market, resolves when the cycle turns. Northport's insurance problem doesn't resolve when rates come down. It resolves when the underwriting math changes for the southwest Florida coast, which requires a multi-year period without major storm events and a gradual return of private carrier appetite. Neither of those things is on a predictable timeline. For a retiree relying on conventional financing, this market offers very limited protection against the unknown. Port Charlotte. Port Charlotte's pitch was always about water. Extensive canal streets, direct access to Charlotte Harbor and the Gulf of Mexico, waterfront living at a fraction of the cost of Naples or Sarasota. For retirees who wanted to keep a boat in the backyard and spend mornings on the water, it was a genuinely compelling offer. What happened to Port Charlotte's insurance market after Hurricane Ian goes beyond premiums rising? Since 2023, at least 4 major private insurance carriers have completely stopped writing new homeowner policies in coastal Port Charlotte zip codes. Not raised their rates significantly, stopped writing policies entirely. When private underwriters exit a market completely, buyers are redirected to Citizens Property Insurance, the state's insurer of last resort. The current Citizens quote for older homes in Port Charlotte runs around $12,000 per year with a $40,000 windstorm deductible. Map that against a retirement income and the math frequently stops working before the conversation gets to a purchase price. And even when a buyer is prepared to absorb that cost, the transaction often collapses on the lending side. Mortgage lenders have their own insurance adequacy requirements, and a Citizens policy with a $40,000 deductible doesn't always satisfy them. The result is a market where deals die not from disagreements over price, but from an insurance problem that neither the buyer nor the seller has the ability to solve. Days on market for older homes exceed 100 days. Active inventory is up 30%. The median has fallen 5% to around 350,000. The canal lifestyle that drew buyers here is physically unchanged. The financial infrastructure required to access it through conventional homeownership has broken down for most of the buyer pool. Sarasota. Sarasota is the cultural capital of the Florida Gulf Coast. Performing arts venues, upscale dining, oceanfront museums, world-class beaches, the walkable high-end district of St. Armand's Circle. If you were designing a retirement destination with quality of life as the primary metric, you'd produce something close to Sarasota. The city's reputation among affluent retirees and snowbirds is well-earned and hasn't diminished. What has changed is the financial profile of owning property there, particularly in the older condo stock, and prestige, it turns out, doesn't insulate a building from structural legislation. The same Senate Bill 4D requirements working through Bradenton's older buildings are running through Sarasota's Bayfront condo inventory simultaneously. Special assessments in this market have reached as high as $80,000 per unit, issued to fund structural reserve requirements that associations had deferred for years. When a building issues an assessment at that level, the dynamic is predictable. The seller pool expands immediately as owners try to exit before the bill becomes their liability, and the buyer pool contracts just as fast once the assessment obligation becomes visible in the listing disclosures. Sarasota's condo inventory has climbed past 14 months of supply. About 24% of active listings carry price cuts, and days on market exceed 80. The broader market median sits around 510,000, down 3% year over year. The city is facing simultaneous pressure from insurance cost increases, assessment obligations on aging buildings, and a general repricing of climate exposure on waterfront properties, three forces that each independently would slow a market. Together, they've shifted leverage away from sellers in ways that weren't visible even 2 years ago. For a retiree who owns an older Sarasota condo and is counting on a certain sale price to fund the next chapter, the current market is delivering less than the asset appeared to be worth, and taking longer to deliver it. Naples. Naples is where this list gets instructive at a different level, because the conventional assumption is that the luxury market operates by different rules. Wealthy buyers, cash transactions, low density, premium location. Surely the dynamics affecting Port Charlotte or Lehigh Acres don't apply here. They do. The mechanisms are identical, only the dollar figures are different. The median home price in Naples sits at around $740,000, down roughly 6% year over year. Properties in high-end Collier County are averaging over 100 days on market, a figure that would have been unthinkable during the 2021 and 2022 peak. About 26% of active listings have already taken price cuts. Annual insurance premiums on premier waterfront estates now run between $15,000 and $25,000, a carrying cost that adds up to real money even for buyers who can absorb it. The post-Ian insurance hardening that's freezing transactions in Port Charlotte and Northport is present in Naples too. It's a regional condition across the southwest coast, not one that stops at the Collier County line. The difference is that wealthy buyers aren't forced to transact. They have optionality. They can watch prices fall and wait for a better entry point without any urgency driving them to the table. And that's exactly what they're doing. The Naples market right now is defined by buyers who can afford to purchase choosing not to, because they see prices continuing to decline and have no reason to step in front of that trend. That kind of patient capital on the buyer side is devastating for sellers who expected their Naples property to command a premium and a quick close. For a retiree holding a Naples property as a primary retirement asset, the current message from the market is clear. The exit is available, but it will cost you time and a meaningful discount from what the property would have fetched at peak. Miami Beach. Miami Beach should probably be its own category because the financial dynamics happening there right now are genuinely unlike anything else in Florida's residential market. The average monthly rent in the broader Miami metro currently runs just over $3,000, which tells you the lifestyle demand is completely intact. People still want to be in Miami Beach. The oceanfront address, the Art Deco architecture, the international energy, the walkability, none of that has depreciated. What has depreciated significantly and measurably is the financial case for owning a condo there rather than renting one. The median condo price in Miami Beach has dropped 9% year over year to around $650,000. But the price correction is almost secondary to what's happening with the structural assessment bills moving through the aging high-rise inventory. Under Florida's post-Surfside Reserve Law, oceanfront towers built in the 1960s and 70s are being required to fund decades of deferred maintenance at once. Buildings where the HOAs made a consistent practice of keeping monthly fees low by kicking the structural work down the road. One documented case from a 1970s era unit captures what this looks in practice. A $92,000 structural reserve assessment, issued alongside a separate $40,000 concrete restoration fee. $132,000 in obligations landing on a single condo owner, on top of an existing mortgage and regular maintenance fees. That is not a fringe case. It represents the category of liability moving through the older oceanfront inventory along Miami Beach's water right now. When those assessments arrive, owners list. Buildings with multiple for-sale banners and extended vacancy patterns don't project stability to prospective buyers. Condo inventory in Miami Beach has now climbed past 16 months of supply, among the highest in the state. The irony that the data supports directly is that Miami Beach has effectively become a stronger market for renters than for buyers. The lifestyle the address delivers is still fully accessible at the rental price point. The ownership liability attached to the older stock has become genuinely difficult to justify, and the buyers who understand that math are acting accordingly. Cape Coral. Cape Coral is the worst performing major housing market in the United States right now. Not a struggling secondary city, not a niche market with thin volume. A major Florida metro with over 200,000 residents, sitting at the bottom of every meaningful housing performance metric in the country. The median home price has fallen to around $375,000, a 9.6% decline year over year. Active inventory has more than tripled from 2021 levels. About 31% of active listings are carrying price cuts. Properties are averaging over 120 days on market. Foreclosure filings are up roughly 30% year over year. And annual property insurance premiums on older homes have risen from a historical baseline of around $2,200 to somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000, a cost increase that arrived while property values were falling. Those numbers don't sit in isolation, they compound. A buyer who purchased at the 2022 peak may now hold a home worth less than their outstanding mortgage balance, negative equity, while simultaneously watching their annual carrying costs climb by thousands of dollars. They are paying more every year to hold an asset that is worth less than what they owe on it. That is the financial position of a significant number of Cape Coral homeowners right now, and the market data doesn't suggest that position is improving on a short timeline. Cape Coral's physical appeal is real and worth acknowledging, because it helps explain why the boom happened at all. Over 400 miles of navigable canals with direct Gulf access, large residential lots, a water-centric lifestyle that's genuinely rare at any price point, let alone a sub-$400,000 price point. During the 2020 and 2021 run, Cape Coral was delivering something unusual, waterfront living that middle-income buyers could actually reach. The demand that generated was legitimate. What Hurricane Ian exposed is how much of that value proposition depended on an insurance market that no longer exists. The storm didn't just damage structures, it damaged the entire financial infrastructure around homeownership in the Southwest Florida canal markets. Insurance repriced, lenders tightened, buyers hesitated, and the speculative inventory that builders had added during the boom had nowhere to go. The oversupply compounded the insurance problem, which compounded the price decline, which compounded the foreclosure rate. Drive through certain canal neighborhoods in Cape Coral today, and roughly every fifth house has a for sale sign. Some of those signs have been sitting in the same yards for 4 and 5 months. The canals look the same as they always have. The financial reality attached to the properties alongside them is fundamentally different from what it was when those signs first went up. For a retiree approaching or already in retirement with fixed income and limited capacity to absorb sudden cost increases, equity losses, or multi-year recovery timelines, Cape Coral right now concentrates exactly the kind of compounding structural risk that retirement financial planning exists to avoid. The statewide average, $376,000, down 3.7%, doesn't tell you anything useful if you're trying to make a decision about a specific town. What this list shows across 10 very different markets is that the damage isn't random. The insurance crisis is concentrated along the southwest Gulf Coast in markets that Hurricane Ian hit directly. The assessment crisis is running through condo stock built before 1990, up and down both coasts, wherever HOAs spent decades deferring the maintenance bill. The oversupply problem clusters in inland markets that scaled too fast during the boom and lost their overflow demand when rates rose. None of these are permanent conditions. Markets correct, insurance markets eventually reprice risk rather than avoiding it entirely, and legislative pressure tends to produce compliant solutions over time. But corrections take years, and years cost money when you're carrying a depreciating asset with rising annual expenses and a fixed income. What the same data also shows, and this matters as much as anything on this list, is that the buyers and retirees leaving these markets aren't leaving Florida. The Tampa Metro's inland suburbs, specifically Land O'Lakes and Plant City, are currently among the hottest housing markets in the entire country. The demand has moved, not disappeared. It's relocated to places where the insurance market still functions, the carrying costs are manageable, and the price hasn't already peaked and reversed. The smart money didn't stop believing in Florida. It got more specific about which part of Florida it believes in, and right now, that part is not on this list.